it's time to usher in a new generation of My Little Pony, with historical revisionism, war propaganda, racism, scaremongering, and corporations becoming rich out of fear. Yeah, that sounds about right. After changing the landscape of a franchise and animation fandom as a whole over the past decade, Generation 4 of MLP has been laid to rest, with a phoenix stubbornly rising from the ashes. And I mean that literally, as it used a cameo from the past to establish it. A moment that made my Alicorn Twilight-hating friend's blood boil over, as he probably rage quit the movie inside of a few minutes. A new animation style with new characters in a world that only resembles Equestria in name. Earth Pony, Pegasi and unicorns are at each other's throats, and everyone is scared. The perfect time for professional Scootaloo lookalike Sunny Starscout to set out with enthusiasm to bring them together again. An easy task, right? You would be wrong, especially when you don't toe the societal line and every person you meet could be a threat. In a move that certainly shocked many, including myself, the rule of Twilight Sparkle full of friendship, magic, acceptance, tolerance and harmony has been consigned to the sands of time. Ancient history, as the film stated, as the citizens of Bridlewood, Maritime Bay and Zephyr Heights have to now build this world from the ground up afresh. There is no guiding light or helping hand for them, except for the setup that enables them to run forward in their own direction. Now, you may think, if you are not a fan of this franchise, that, oh, this may just be social justice warrior woke propaganda. You may say that based on the usage of divisive, polarizing dialogue as a forefront for the film's entire narrative, but when you think that My Little Pony is the lone vesture of media trying to showcase a mirror to the world about its issues, you may be quite surprised that it has even managed to do it, let alone has it even done it in any form of quality. The fact of the matter is that this franchise has a wide-spanning audience of many genders, ages, and creeds to appeal to. And given that many of them have grown through the last decade under the similar banner, it's appropriate that they tackle something a bit more than just tea parties and dresses. You can tell that the franchise, despite being colourful and sending its merchandise directly to little children, has a lot more to offer than what it used to. And this film is a bold leap in a new direction for a new generation that'll hopefully live up to the hype. It's been out for a few weeks now, so let's find out whether it's managed to enthrall this giant audience that it now has to appease, or whether it buckles under the pressure that it has given itself. Well, let's find out and give it the appropriate critique. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a brand new, significant dawn for Pones N Stuff. Fittingly, I'm going to be starting things off by looking at the one thing that every single fan on this platform has an opinion on: the animation. Because honestly, it was the only thing we had to work with before we saw the film outright. And while it begins with a 2D sequence and a G4 cameo swiftly hitting us with an uppercut, once the 3D CGI designs and backgrounds come onto the screen, they're relatively fine in stable motion, and while I honestly believe they look weird when it comes to the promotional material, I grew attached to them quicker than I had anticipated. Expressive when necessary, keeping the glisteningly big eyes to draw attention to the face, being textured to look like those soft felt versions of the toys. And in a blatant middle finger to Gen 4, they only have one small cutie mark on one flank, which is never really brought attention to at all when it comes to meaning or importance. As a result, these ponies are more detailed and less drastic in proportion compared to what their counterparts were, and were more pleasing to the eye, and despite some getting used to, when you combine them with settings of varied colour, texture and scope, glistened like the morning sun on the water, with some smooth transitions, editing, and set pieces, especially when found in 2 musical numbers in tandem with memorable character designs, make it feel like this category has already overcome the hurdle of expectation that was required of it. That was until you start seeing them at a gallop, however, where the movement speed is awkwardly sluggish, leading to depressing depictions of dynamic degradation. Cumbersome motion blur and an overuse of foreground focus compared to background makes a slow motion movement of them stick out like a sore thumb and takes away from the intensity expected of scenes that require it, which isn't helped by awkward framing and shot composition, which in some cases amplifies the sterility of the locations at their worst and detaches the viewer from experiencing scenes such as this bridge with a bit more enthusiasm. A side-on view and a sight of the edge of the bridge crumbling from a low-angle shot would have served much better than a wide shot with that lone tree in view, programming you to expect that it's going to be utilised at some point. Lo and behold, it managed to do so seconds later. Examples like these are one of the many reasons why I have such a troubled relationship with 3D animation as a whole, because it has so many more pitfalls to find itself wallowing in if things go wrong and make themselves apparent to the viewer. Yes, you have some very nice, adorable, springy and vibrant characters with nice designs and settings that are elaborate and show lots of detail. That is something we cannot fault. And there are editing moments that made me stand up and go, oh, that is really nice and smooth and clean, and I love it. But when it comes to something so simple as their movement and the shot composition not really adding that sense of intensity and dynamism to them, making the areas around them feel absolutely lifeless and hollow. The problem is that when something at such a structural, foundational level has such a jarring effect on the viewing experience as a whole, you really are detaching yourself from the overall quality of the product. It makes you really yearn for what this film could have been visually. It let itself down by self-sabotaging itself. If that wasn't the case, we'd be looking at something that was probably on the verge of matching what the Gen 4 film had, and I don't like making comparisons to it, but on that front, Gen 4 managed to win out. There is one thing, however, that is supercharged compared to the film that preceded it in ways many of us were not expecting: the story and the narrative, especially when it comes to its depth, which, as I noted in the intro, carries a very packed satchel over its shoulder. For a film whose appeal is directed at young girls primarily, the fact that it was able to echo current-day societal ills and send our ponies on a journey to remedy them, it is a ballsy take that paid off, given the level of division, fracture, and fear that is so ingrained into the narrative from the moment it begins. This is especially true given that G4's influence could have really swamped over everything and muddied the waters, but as it's been consigned to ancient history despite minimal attempts to reference it where possible, it made the task of constructing a brand new Equestria with polarizing socio-political entities and all new character dynamics from scratch a much easier task than the daunting one it looked like from the outset. Thanks to a stern yet clear direction, the world building and lore can live rent-free and have the breathing space necessary to properly interact with the viewer and show just how deep it runs, whilst using a Don Bluth-esque destruction of conventional Todorov narrative structure to stack the deck against the protagonist from the get-go, providing cohesiveness and association that should not feel this well earned after an hour and a half of film to see through. Yet it does so comfortably. Given the stressful job that this fish out of water rising up against all foes tale has, it did a pretty damn good job, all things considered. The societal temperament of scaremongering, misinformation and fear was established as being the status quo for seemingly centuries in this land, and the retention of G4's themes of friendship, togetherness and camaraderie against all odds juxtaposed rather coldly against the negative impact of raising a mollycoddle generation of petulant children in this environment, fueled by the desire to retain said status quo in order to benefit from it, all for selfish means. For a franchise that has a reputation to exude comfort, it's unsettling given appropriate context, but it allows that sense of hope and perseverance to never die and make the will of our main characters and the plot remain strong. By stepping out of that franchise-established safe space and going all in with no sugarcoating, bloody hell does it hit like a wrecking ball and ensures that even the song lyrics touch upon just how depressing it all is. Yet with optimism and a desire for change, those who fight against it will endear themselves to and connect with a viewer no matter how old or what gender they are, in what was a very mature sight for a franchise that is often segregated into the shadow of a childish corner. A corner which is painfully apparent, especially when it has to try and raise a tonally appropriate one-liner or visual gag to break through the malaise and attempt to gain a smile from the viewer. And thankfully, the musical numbers provided most of the appropriate tonics, so I don't feel too aggrieved by that. But once you start noticing a few of them, more come through the woodwork, taking the sheen off what had been an imperious hand, and that is something that I felt was coming. Due to the core antagonist mostly residing away from the action, stewing and building to an almighty conclusion, the stability of this all-against-one narrative mentality gets tired quickly, especially when it echoes the G4 film in static progression, just going from one location to another with shifting priorities establishing it. And given the fact that it derivatively echoes both Mitchell's vs. the Machines and Disney's Raya in its foundational plot threads, it leads to predictability manifesting arduously, whilst callbacks to prior moments in the story felt artificial and shoehorned in an attempt to make it feel well-rounded, when honestly it just screamed of desperation to remind people why this moment occurred in the first place. These combine with a sluggish pace that is enabled thanks to a plodding and bloated second act to make you realise, oh shit, they need to end this thing in a satisfying way with very little time to do so, and by cranking it right up to 11 and rushing to it with no comeuppance in the end for the mama's boy turned totalitarian, leads to moments of drama and the action set pieces not hitting with the sincerity and intensity that one would have expected given the heaviness weighing on the characters' minds in these moments. Finally, the lack of a meaty exposition detailing just how Equestria fell into such fundamentally broken societal disrepair was really disheartening. Not just because I have come from watching all 9 seasons and the movies and the side material of the world that G4 made, but it would have really given us an insight into just how the Earth Ponies, the Pegasi, and the Unicorns all grew to hate each other. Yes, by establishing modern-day Equestria so far separated from what preceded it, you inevitably negate the problem that the G4 film had. It allows new viewers to come to their own conclusions, but at the same time, you're left wondering why the hell have they included a reference to the prior generation if they're not going to elaborate on just how influential the fallout of their era is on the overall story as a whole. That is the problem. It feels like you're shortchanging both old and new audiences, and I was wondering to myself, how the hell did this happen? How did this incredibly important piece of narrative construction be forgotten about? And then it hit me. It was co-written by Gillian M. Barrow, the writer of some of the worst episodes that Friendship is Magic had to offer. The one where Pinkie Pie knows, Fluttershy leans in. The Point of No Return especially was number 4 on my worst episodes countdown. And the fact that these same issues that occurred in these episodes happened in this film baffles the mind, and you realise just how damaging this was to the overall quality of the story and narrative of this film, which up until then had been the best thing in it. I understand that I am not a writer, therefore me critiquing a writer's work doesn't seem fair, but when you have a reputation for doing episodes of a kids' TV show poorly, and you're then taken up to write for the movie and hoping that it is not repeated, you're more than likely going to see things reoccur. And that's exactly what's happened, and I feel like I have to really highlight this. It doesn't completely take away from the commendable job that Barrow and co-writer Tim Sullivan did to construct all of this, but it isn't the finished article that it could have been, and much like the animation, it stumbles while trying to run with its hands full. It means that I can't hide my disappointment about what could have been in the broader scheme of things. As you can tell, this film has embarked on the right path to walk down to reach the goal that it desires. However, thanks to aimless and misguided decision making, thanks to a faulty compass being in their possession, it has strayed down the wrong direction many a time, taking it away from its eventual destination more than it rightfully should have. And while these problems cast an ominous shadow over the qualities the film has, those qualities outshine all beneath them, giving us a very mixed bag to rifle through. And while it has not been able to shy away from sporting a few black eyes thanks to some errant right hooks, it does manage to give us a lot of maturity, complexity, competency and detail within the story and animation to build a very solid foundation as a piece of groundwork for the rest of the film to build upon and make more of it. The question is whether they were able to actually be successful in utilising it effectively. Thankfully, the results of which have given us some pleasant surprises from territories that have a lot of expectation weighing on their shoulders. Those aforementioned themes are entrenched throughout the film so much, it's no wonder that it would have the confidence, determination and purpose to deliver the appropriate moral associated with them in a way that even G4 couldn't. Yes, the moral of uniting a fractured world under love, friendship and caring was hammered into the side of the head harder than a Karen screaming for the manager because her gazpacho was cold, but the symbolism and the lesson about not being afraid of your neighbours and embracing differences reappropriate poignantly a socio-political issue that's only gotten worse over the last decade and needs to have it yelled from the heavens into the skull of children and adults alike, so that it can be excused as a noble cause no matter how obstinate it can feel, especially when it's coming from My Little Pony of all things. When it comes together, it's so phenomenally implemented that I honestly can't complain, and it's arguably the most resilient and strong of any moral that the entire Last Gen series has ever done. I will die on that hill proclaiming it until the end of time. The same quality can also be said about the characters and the voice acting, consisting of a solid mix of recognisable names and James Marsden further adding to his anthropomorphic cinematic universe. They swung in to be the arguable pillar that held the fractured elements of this film together and stopped them from spoiling the party. Much like the G4 Special Rainbow Road Trip that I reviewed not long ago, the elongated and laboured pacing not only helped establish the world to a stupendous degree, but allowed each character in a surprisingly lean cast the space necessary to highlight themselves and become multifaceted, in time allowing those portraying them to have some fun and give it their all, turning some occasionally wince-inducing dialogue into palatable gruel for us as viewers to feast on. Sunny is a typical happy-go-lucky protagonist parlayed into the role of outsider rising against a torrent of domineering rhetoric. Despite some overeager Twilight-esque tendencies from time to time, she's endearing and warm in a resilient desire for the truth and cohesion between the races, more than earning her alicorn symbolism for a job well done through sheer force of will and effort. Hitch was the male character in MLP that I was waiting for after so many years of poor representation. Confident and driven, yet easily able to roll situational and word-based comedic jabs off of his back naturally without losing stature. While his friendship with Sunny and his job duties often clashed, they built a durable foundation that allowed him to highlight intelligence, to know his friend well enough to find her without the film outwardly telling the audience such. This is the kind of stability that a lot of G4 male counterparts would have craved for, but floundered with, and he's arguably my favourite of the cast. Izzy, whilst obviously this film's ponker, had her eccentricities dialed back in comparison, which was good, especially when an emotional underbelly connecting the film's beginning and her arrival into Maritime Bay and the revelation of her barren social life at home in Bridlewood became apparent. A sprightly and enthusiastic figure who cut through the seriousness of her counterpart's situation like a knife through butter, but with enough precision to ensure it never lost form or purpose in the process. It's no wonder that she's loved by so many in the fandom, because it's easy to see why. It's easy to see why, I've just got that joke. With or without the bastard tennis ball being a thing once you know its true purpose. The two royal sisters, Zip and Pip, though while phonetically delightful to say out loud, had opposing personalities with awkwardly jarring results in the cast dynamic. Zip exuded natural coolness from the get-go, arriving with a dry sense of wit and a obviously justifiable moral compass in the face of her mother Queen Haven's desire to maintain the lie of Pegasus monarchist superiority. It was just brilliant to see unfold, and a welcome window to see what Rainbow Dash could have been without the self-aggrandizing and egotism ramped up to 11. Her twin, on the other hand, was basically those two things: a vain and easily dislikable social media influencer who only tags along due to the threat of being arrested, despite adding a tense and irritable foil alongside Hitch in relation to the others and the unfurling plot, really adding nothing to proceedings except for being a singing and style feminine cliche that felt out of place and abrasive against the troop of good-willed ponies. Her aforementioned mother and the cunning unicorn brute Alphabetal only serviced the plot and ever-branching conflict progression to where they were nice to see and were voiced well, but left little to the imagination as afterthoughts, with their sense of pride being dishevelled for the sake of our main characters. The two who stood out from the pack, however, were mother-son duo Phyllis and Sprout Cloverleaf. One was a serious and oddly compassionless model of parental perfection, contrasting with her spoilt turd of a child who, thanks to relentless praise and support without reins and leashes in place, rose from lowly deputy to a drunk on power emperor out of jealousy for his lack of success in the shadow of his best friend. A sobering tale of protective and overly saccharine parenting backfiring in a direct shot at the Donald Trumps of the world, getting what they want because they believe they have a right to success and power without earning it through hard graft, and it's an easy way to direct viewer scorn onto, especially when an outwardly kind and compassionate counterpart is skewed as being more dangerous than someone with no filter and a free platform to influence and indoctrinate gullible fools into submission. Does that ring a bell too close to home for some of you? It should make those who relate squirm, and it fits the gradually unfurling antagonist role given to both of them. These fully realised characters were all voiced to absolute perfection by all involved, to where you could hear the relish they had in bringing them to life. And as noted, making that flat and overly simplistic script sing and dance with more impact and reckless abandon than it had any right to do so. However, you have to remember that this was a film made by Hasbro to promote toys to children, which meant that they had to cram in phrases that those children will repeat ad nauseum and drive their parents mad with. Examples such as masking superstition and censorship under the guise of jinxies, and their farcically infantile bing bong ritual, alongside the phonetically polarizing phony pony full of baloney to sour any sense of dramatic intent about the royal family being overthrown and warrants being placed out for their arrests. While I do love and can appreciate the alliteration, I hate the implementation and intent. Yet that doesn't dampen the stellar job from all involved in making these characters lovable, and in the case of two, very easily hateable. We finish the critique in fittingly well-rounded ways with the music, which, much like the story and animation, offers up some lovely showings, but is at the end of the day a jumbled mixed bag that serves to frustrate as much as it elevates. Songs like Gonna Be My Day and fit right in with a sugary and powerful injections of life to kickstart and rejuvenate the film at appropriate points respectively, to where even a rap sequence felt at home in the latter, something that, given the reputation of the pony that Izzy is echoing, I never thought I'd ever say. The antagonistic anthemic rocker Danger Danger, end credit ditty Together, and the full version of Glowin' Up were growers whose earworms gradually burrowed into the brain as their melody and catchiness worked wonders and proved that all five as a collective were on par with G4's material and standard pop fare to boot. Not to mention the amount of memes in my UK Brony server that have popped up due to that angry mob. Good lord, it actually provides more entertainment outside of the film than in it, which I honestly did not think was possible. The good times do not last, however, as the solo-sung version of Glowin' Up, which was apparently supposed to be Pip's star performance, was dull and lifeless compared to the full band version that really has a lot more going on. Much like the film's official theme, apparently, It's Alright, which was very derivative of Pharrell Williams' style of funk and R&B influenced pop, which was right at home sectioned away in a pony version of DDR where its irrelevance was noted. In fact, calling that the official theme is an insult to the rest of the musical numbers here, including Looking Out For You, which was saved by a passionate duet by Izzy and Sonny as they bonded through the power of montage, but it's uninspired instrumentally and lyrically, and its cripplingly short length ensures that it'll be easily forgotten. I know that because it appears last on the Spotify album, and it really is a damper on things when you get through so much good quality to end up here. And while I note that there are some really good musical numbers in this film, they frequently yo-yo between each other in quality across the film, whilst also struggling with extremely fastly sung lyrics and overly repetitive choruses, numbing their power. Yes, I understand this helps the parent who doesn't have to worry about the entire bloody soundtrack being put on repeat in their car or their living room by their over-exuberant child who just wants to hear these over and over. That is fine, but in the broader scheme of things, when I come out of this with only a few gems out of the type of movie that in 2017 rocked my freaking socks off in this department, it is a little disappointing when it isn't given the due care and attention that it fundamentally deserves under hands that aren't Caleb Chan and Dan Ingram. Speaking of which, it was up to the score to try and rein in some cohesion by accenting where needed and showing its might. Sadly, when your orchestral higher grade movie score is left to flounder outside of key establishing motifs and dramatic sequences of such little intensity, it can only really do so much. When they hit, boy did they, and they resonated intently, but you are often yearning for the score to pump out some life into scenes that needed them, yet the words of the characters dripping in bluntness and wit needed to be heard, where signifying background notes of the past have been phased out. Now, while that is a good thing that they don't need to utilise the score to highlight every single tone or feeling or emotion that the viewer needs, not having them just made that coldness I noted in the story be much more apparent, leading to the emptiness that the animation beleaguered with, at times to an uncomfortable degree. It gives off the impression that the film was all in all fighting for its identity, snuck between the corporate claws stuck in archaic, demographic-focused ways, and an older audience who had matured with its prior incarnation. Thankfully, despite a lot of hurdles to jump through, the latter won out, even if the former was seething in the background, hindering where possible to take the sheen off a well-established, yet notably fractured entity. When I first watched this film, I was content, yet disappointed that this follow-up to G4 had detached itself so intently, yet was still willing to utilise it to connect bronies of all shapes and sizes to it, while stoically reminding them that relations to it have been expunged for the sake of character, story, and narrative clarity. Its woes were painfully apparent, especially in regard to its awful pacing, forgettable yet occasionally fun musical numbers, and predictable story progression that cast a shadow over what was an insane job that the thematic resonance had created to focus and guide this film to a respectable, if not disjointed, conclusion, with some unanswered questions in tow. Upon the second viewing, however, all of those positives, including the character development, animation bright spots, the musical sensationalism, and the sheer density of that thematic richness, represented themselves a lot stronger when I was actively looking for them, even though my opinion was hard to budge at first. It won me over by balancing its audience pandering and simple storytelling into a fun and shockingly relevant film that laughs in the general direction of all who thought it would fail. Is it perfect? Of course not. That strive for determined stability led to it tripping under its own 2 feet a few times, with a lack of urgency and cohesion through some creative decisions that hurt its structural rigidity that it had long sought to champion, and falling back onto infantile writing and repetitive musical number choruses and fast lyrics to coerce its younger audience back into its domineering fray. Regardless of that, it still manages to be a fruitful and entertaining romp that anyone of all ages could enjoy, whether they are a brony or not. It's a rare thing, then, to where it feels serious and ominous like many animated series and films of today, but doesn't forget to still have a good time with the characters and the unveiling of that story, to not let us forget just what this franchise is at its heart. For me, it isn't quite on the same level of quality as the G4 movie. The fact that it started fresh and ran with its ideas right until the end, though, leaves me with confidence that the upcoming special and TV series that are due to arrive within the next 12 to 18 months will echo this quality. It subverted expectations and delivered just when I thought all hope could be lost. That is not a bad thing, and it manages to stand on its own 2 feet, casting off its predecessor in some style. It's a great beginning for MLP's 5th generation. I just hope its momentum can be maintained into the future, with all necessary issues being repaired and fixed. Overall, A New Generation scored a total of 17 out of 25. Which is a B-. In closing, this film is definitive proof that if you're in doubt over whether something is good or bad on the first watch, a second watch may lead you to the right decision, because that first watch, as I noted, left me very disappointed. I was too encumbered by the overhanging influence of Gen 4, clouding my judgment over its quality, to where not seeing it in direct correlation or causation to it meant that it didn't live up to whatever hype I had, despite offering up something new yet oddly familiar. As a result, the second watch, which I always do for Pones N Stuff, by the way, I don't just take my first opinion, I sit down and rip whatever it is apart. And it took me 7.5 hours to do it for this film, and I am so glad I did, because it allowed me to see all of its qualities, its different layers of texture and substance within. And as a result, it left me coming out of it thinking, wow, My Little Pony has done something that, given its past incarnation, up until maybe season 5, it never really managed to pull off consistently. And that was to offer up a well-oiled story with fun characters and a moral that permeates beyond the screen into everyone's minds and hearts, and gave us visual quality and overall musical quality too, to ensure that it stands up as a definingly good and even great piece of animated feature-length filmmaking. And that coming from Hasbro and their associated people, who often like to spit in the face of many of their fan base and their consumers at times, is something I can feel very happy about. And yes, while I personally believe the Gen 4 film is better, that's mostly because, in comparison with everything that it was surrounded and built upon, the film is a massive step up on that regard, despite obvious issues. Here, there is nothing to compare it to. It just stands on its own, whilst looking at the show that it came from and saying, yeah, I'm just gonna do some of my own things whilst taking a few things that you've done well and ensuring that the ship is stabilised and sailed. However, of course, there are some issues, and while it does have pacing problems, visual cues that need to be refined and polished. The songcraft and writing need to be refined to ensure that they are not as a little bit grating on the face and eyes and ears. Once they are done so, and hopefully are done so with the Netflix specials and series that are coming in the next year or so, I can definitely say that the future looks bright for My Little Pony. This wasn't a soulless revamp. A lot of care was done to turn what was a very positive TV show that came before it and take it on a new level entirely. And hopefully, as I watch into the future, it'll live up to this brand new level of expectation that I now have, as Pones N Stuff is put into a slumber until those materials are released. I've been Freddie Thomas, you've been people watching, this is the CC Network, and I will see you all next time.